All right, we're here. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live, wherever you might be joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your Tuesday. Josh Doring, Chris Brown, they are here with me in their correct boxes. 3 days of great football are over. National championship last night. We're here to talk about it. But first and foremost, pleasantries, guys. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. No complaints other than that I would have liked to see a game that I was still wanting to pay attention to in the final minutes instead of just sort of more or less putting it on in the background. But that's okay. I can't be too picky. Doing all right.
It was certainly... I was thankful to get to halftime and still have at least some interest in at least seeing if Ohio State could come out and they get a stop at the end of the first half, and it was really the first stop that they got, and I was like, okay, so maybe they've got something here, and then it became pretty clear pretty quickly that they just weren't going to be able to move the football enough to actually come up with enough points to get anywhere close to Bama, and then so. Midway through the fourth quarter, I was beginning to lose interest. But I was, if I get half of a college football game that I think is at least somewhat competitive at this point, then I'm pretty pleased with it.
And at least, you had a belief at the beginning that Ohio State could play with them.
Sure.
That they weren't chasing the game the entire time. They kind of did the same thing they did against Clemson, 3-and-out on the first possession. But then they got it going after Trey Sermon got hurt, and you thought, okay, you get a touchdown, they make it look pretty easy. They're breaking off some runs. They get the fumble that results in another touchdown, and all of a sudden, game on.
Right, it's 14-14.
Right, and then it was all Alabama from that point. But there's a mental hurdle for me getting really invested in games where teams favored that are clearly better, like Alabama, are up 17-7 or something like that, like in the Notre Dame game. Sure. That game was never really out of the question. It's not like Alabama destroyed them. But when you don't score the points to keep up with them at the beginning and you're chasing the game and they're already the better team, it changes my perception of it. So at least we had a competitive game for a while. But by the middle of the third quarter, fourth quarter, it was just, especially those last 8 or so minutes, just trying to run down the clock.
And I was when Trey Sermon is out with the shoulder injury, I was like, oh no, that might be the end of it right there. And props to Master Teague for coming in, 15 carries, 65 yards after he scored the Ohio State's first 2 touchdowns. He wasn't incredibly effective after that, but quite frankly, Ohio State's offense wasn't all that effective after those first 2 scores. But I was worried, Alabama, after the 3-and-out marches down and scores, Trey Sermon is out, and I'm like, oh no, this could get ugly quickly. And of course we get to a point where it's 35-17 at halftime, and things don't ever get all that much closer. But after the first 5 minutes of the game, I was, oh no, this game might already be over. Master Teague comes in, they're able to move the ball a little bit, and to your point, Josh, I think that kept me in it a little bit longer. They never ended up being able to be super effective. And listen, Justin Fields had to be arguably the best player on the field, or at least one of the 2 best players on the field for Ohio State to have a chance to win this game. 17-33 for 194 yards and a touchdown was just never going to be good enough to actually hang around with this Alabama offense. So it wasn't just Master Teague who stopped being as effective as he was early in the game. They were just never able to get into a rhythm, and you never feared what Ohio State could do on any play. That's how at least I was feeling when I was fearing, oh, okay, you mean Devontae Smith finding a way to be guarded by a middle linebacker, and he's just sort of trotting away from him. Or Najee Harris seems to be, especially in the first half, was untouchable, and he was also catching passes out of the backfield. He had 7 receptions as well, and it's just this feeling of how in the world are you supposed to stop this offense when they have, at least last night and pretty much every night that they've played all season, they have the 3 best offensive weapons in the game in Mac Jones at quarterback, who is, I don't. There aren't many quarterbacks who are as mistake free as Mac Jones and make it look as easy as Mac Jones does, even if he's not super explosive with his athleticism or anything. But he does a really great job with the weapons at his disposal, and I just never felt that way about Ohio State's offense, even though, right, there are pros all over that side of the football for Ohio State as well.
Yeah, I mean, we all kind of knew, going into this game that the recipe for Ohio State was going to have to be, like you said, an incredible performance from Justin Fields. He was going to need, Trey Sermon to have a good game to give them options. And that defense was never going to be able to, obviously, you're only going to be able to do so much against Alabama, but you were going to have to either sort of slow everybody down across the board a little bit and get a couple big stops here and there, or you were going to have to prevent, one player from completely taking over the game. And we, of course, know that that's exactly what happened. And you have one player completely take over the game, but it's not even like it was just that play. I mean, right, it's one thing that you have one player completely take over the game in Devontae Smith, but also everything else that they're doing, and you just can't stop them. There's nothing you can do, to stop that. Obviously, I think there was certainly there was certainly talk in the first half of, just double team Devontae Smith, do whatever it takes to slow him down, but that wasn't going to affect the end result. By one point, the game was over by that point, essentially, for one, and for two, there's just too many weapons that Alabama has at its disposal, even though they were banged up themselves. I mean, they were certainly battling injuries throughout the game as well, and it just didn't matter. It just didn't matter, and with Trey Sermon out, I was impressed too with Master Teague in keeping this, because it could have unraveled even faster, and it didn't. But at the end of the day, when Sermon is out, and when you have Justin Fields being okay but not spectacular,
mm-hmm.
there's just not much you can do. It's sort of like I don't even. Yeah, there's just not much. There's only so much you can do in that situation. It's sort of, there leaves me at a loss for words of sort of an explanation further than just the team that had the most dominant offensive season in college football history had a dominant offensive game against a good team that was really banged up, was hurting from those injuries, and needed star-like performances from other guys, and got good ones instead of star performances.
And it's easy to forget that Jalen Waddle played but was clearly not anywhere close to 100%. And that the Remington Award winner, the best offensive lineman in the country, was not available until he came in at the very end because he's their captain and they just let him snap the ball for taking a knee.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like this Alabama team was at full strength. And then, of course, you also had the injuries in this game. But to the Devontae Smith point, and like you said, Chris, that was I like using the analogy of the Titans just because I think there are some similarities in terms of what they do and the way their offenses are built. What the Ravens were able to do was to say, okay, we're putting 8 guys in the box. We're going to stop Derrick Henry. They were much more successful with that than Ohio State was against Najee Harris, although it's not like he broke off 20-yard runs after 20-yard run. But he also, like you said, Josh, was a factor in the passing game and just kept making plays. But then also you had Marlon Humphrey, who sometimes got the better of A.J. Brown. And A.J. Brown was the only receiver having an impact in that game.
Yeah.
Shaun Wade did absolutely nothing to stop Devontae Smith. And at this point, there's one guy who might be able to slow Devontae Smith down, and it's his teammate Patrick Surtain. Shaun Wade is... That was the... in terms of NFL projection, Shaun Wade has really... I've been disappointed with him this season because I thought he could really cement himself as an elite corner, and I have some real questions. He's still a very good one, but I think it's clear that Patrick Surtain is the best corner in college football.
And that
But
Devontae Smith is the Heisman Trophy winner. I mean,
Right,
I have a
and
hard time giving Shaun Wade crap for not being able to guard the college football player that makes people look like they're standing still. Like, I haven't seen since like Reggie Bush running back and forth across the field like you do on the NCAA football games, right? That you run a sweep, and if it doesn't work out to the right, you just turn your guy around and run to the left. Reggie Bush was like doing that in real life, and Devontae Smith was doing the same thing. It wasn't nearly as a competitive of a battle as I was hoping it would be, though. Right? You should never even draw up a play in which, like just make it very simple for Shaun Wade. Shaun Wade, just go and guard him and worry about nothing else, and we'll scheme to pick up any hypothetical holes that you would usually be in if your sole job wasn't to go and try and guard Devontae Smith. Like the fact that Tough Borland ever ends up on Devontae Smith is preposterous. Right. Like the one touchdown, I can't. It was his third touchdown of the half, where that should never happen. And there were past plays where Devontae Smith was wide open. If anything else, put 3 guys on him. So at least somebody else has to catch the football. I was pretty and right. I don't think. Right, you don't really understand how hard it is to guard Devontae Smith until you're asked to guard Devontae Smith. I'm sure, and and everything I'm saying here is easier said than done, but it's pretty easy to at least have somebody who's actually capable of running as fast as Devontae Smith in the vicinity, and that wasn't the case way too many times. I mean, he's so good, but he's like. The guy who's number 1 on the scouting report, you should never let have 215 yards of receiving in the first half, because that just means you're doing a bad job. And there's a difference between doing a bad job and him just you not being able to completely stop him.
Right, and that was the point that I wanted to get to, was right the defensive game plan and the idea of putting 4 linebackers out there.
Right, and part of that's by necessity because Ohio State gets thin back there quickly, but
and it's obviously built to stop Najee Harris in the run first. But at some point, at the start of the second quarter or something, when he's already got 4 or 5 catches, and the one in particular on the levels play where just somebody chose not to go with him. I don't care what. Like at some point, just stay with Devontae Smith and make somebody else beat you. Right. That part of it, and why you weren't doubling him. To me, there was just a point where you had to say, okay, whatever we were trying to do is not working. Mm-hmm. We need to make somebody else. Yeah, this is not about Shaun. This is more about that than Shaun Wade. I was hoping to see a more competitive matchup.
And he certainly had his moments where I was like, he just doesn't seem to be. And there was one play in particular where he just sort of, like, you should never let Devontae Smith just run off. Yeah, free release. Mm-hmm. And he just, and those are the kind of things that, to your point, give you a little bit of concern. And then there was the goal line play where, like, if he's just running step for step with, I think it was Bolden, Slade Bolden. It was Slade Bolden's touchdown. And Shaun Wade was on Bolden, and Bolden was in motion prior to the snap. And I'm not taking full credit for this because Herb Street pointed it out on the broadcast, but it was a play that, Bolden scored, and if Shaun Wade had just been sprinting with him when he went in motion, Wade would have been there before he got to the goal line, and he met him basically at the goal line. At that point, it's just, you can't expect somebody to stop complete motion of a football player at that point. But so it wasn't just, so there were, it's not all on Shaun Wade.
No, not at all.
But there were a couple of plays I was like, those were the type of plays that I wasn't at least expecting to see, right? That even if he gets beat, you just get beat because Devontae Smith is that good, not because you're failing to do some fundamental things to try to slow down the momentum of a wide receiver.
Right, and I don't understand why they didn't make that adjustment earlier, because by the time they were, it was too late. Like, you can only wait to do, I mean, I still they still should have been better with handling him from the get go. But putting that aside, right, you can tell very quickly into that game that you need to change your approach, and they just didn't. They just kept going with making the same kind of mistakes. That's when you have to pivot. That's when you have to say, I know we had this game plan. We were trying to do it X way, and we're trying to, we know Alabama has all these weapons. We don't want to put too much focus on one because another will hurt us. At some point, you have to say, this guy's having the game of his life. This guy, we have to change our approach. And it only does so much good if you're trying to change that approach when the game's already over. And essentially, the game was mostly over by halftime. Not completely, but for all intents and purposes, it was over. It was out of reach. The statement was already made by the time they were trying to make that adjustment. And yeah, there's only so much you can do. You're not going to dig yourself out of a hole like that against the best team in the sport. You have to realize early that if you don't make that adjustment, it's going to snowball.
And then you had so to me it was just kind of a story of they weren't good enough and they didn't execute well enough. Even the one play, I think it was Garrett Wilson who beat Surtain and made him look silly in the red zone.
Mm-hmm.
And Fields missed the throw, if I'm remembering correctly. That would have been a touchdown.
Yeah.
They actually somebody threw at Surtain and they beat him.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't make it work.
Mm-hmm.
That was different from the first touchdown, like after Fields' like 35-yard run and then he threw a touchdown the next play. You're talking about a different play?
Yeah, I think it was I think it was the possession they settled for a field goal.
Okay, gotcha.
If I'm remembering correctly.
Gotcha.
But it's just, and yeah, I think the other important thing to keep in mind is it's just so hard to comprehend how difficult it is to stop this Alabama offense. Because Najee Harris could have had if they would have gone out there with 6 defensive backs and doubled Devontae Smith the entire game, I mean, Najee Harris would have had 150 plus yards rushing.
Right.
And the other point I really want to harp on for a second is part of this is that you just need to do a better job on Devontae Smith, and part of this is also a credit to Steve Sarkisian. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sold on Steve Sarkisian at Texas and that idea and the way that Texas has operated the last couple weeks in terms of how this all went down. I've got plenty of questions like everybody else. But he had an excellent season. He is an excellent play caller, and he did a phenomenal job, as he has all season, of putting his guys in positions to be successful. The one touchdown where Devontae Smith is coming in motion and then goes back across and just sort of sneaks out into the flat.
Yeah.
That's nearly impossible to. You have to be prepared and figure out exactly how you're going to guard something like that. Just the amount of motion and the creativity, it makes it that much more difficult to guard when it's hard enough to just stop Devontae Smith. But then when you have him moving around and Sarkisian is intentionally putting him in those kind of positions because he knows it makes your life miserable. The Alabama coaching staff did a very, very good job preparing for this game and in this season and putting their players in a position to be successful. And on one level, it's very simple to just say, let's get our best players the ball. All 3 of us could have said that. It's the same thing with Brian Dable and Buffalo. Let's throw the ball to Stephon Diggs a lot. It probably makes Josh Allen better. It makes me look like a really good offensive
right, yeah.
But the ability to put your guys into position to be successful, Sark does deserve an immense amount of credit. He called a phenomenal game, and those little intricacies that they kept pointing out in the broadcast, it just makes life that much harder on top of actually just trying to stop these guys who are better than your players already.
So I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
This year's Alabama offense versus last year's LSU offense.
I'll take this year's Alabama offense. That's my gut reaction.
If I have Jalen Waddle, I don't think it's particularly close. I think, I mean, at least I'm more, and Devontae Smith's the best offensive player between the two. Burrow had 1,100 yards more passing last year, but they also played 2 more games. So if Mac Jones gets 2 more games, he goes from 4,500 to 5,200 or something like that, and then that looks really comparable. Of course, he wouldn't throw 19 touchdowns in the next 2 games. 19. He threw 41, and he was 19 behind Joe Burrow, to just sort of put into perspective how freaking ridiculous Joe Burrow's season was. 60 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 5,671 yards passing. It's absolutely preposterous. But everywhere else I think is fairly comparable. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Najee Harris. Najee had the statistically better season.
Oh yeah, I want Harris all day.
And he's certainly the bigger, more imposing back. That dude is ridiculous. I've never seen somebody who's 230 look like he's not 230 like that. Like 230-pound back, and that's just a testament to how strong he is, right? And how all of his weight is productive and functional weight. I wonder what that's like. But and then in the receiving core, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson are comparable to your, especially comparable to your Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle, but also, John Mechie had a really good season, and if you have all 3 of those guys, then it's especially terrifying, Slade Bolden. So the point I'm making here, and I'm curious how close you guys think it is, absolutely, the entire country was absolutely blown away by LSU's offense last year, and phrases like, we'll never see an offense anywhere close to this ever again. It took roughly 6 months for another offense to take the field that looked very, very similar and was equally as terrifying, equally, slightly less, slightly more, depending on what your thoughts are. But the point is that was an historically great offense, and then you got another historically great offense and dominant offense again that just, like LSU last year, it's just unfair to expect anybody to kind of stop them. It's just unfair to expect. They're just that good. And I certainly didn't think we'd be having a conversation about a comparable offense to that LSU offense. But when you look at the numbers and you look at this, players at the skill positions, it's a lot closer than I ever thought we would get, at least this quickly.
And it's interesting to think about it in the context of nobody saw that coming from Joe Burrow, and nobody saw this coming from Mac Jones. It's not like this was Tua coming back,
sure,
or a defending Heisman Trophy winner or something.
Yeah.
Mac Jones wasn't even supposed to have that job.
Yeah.
And he just earned it, and then obviously put up ridiculous numbers. And Burrow was going to be the guy, but nobody knew he couldn't cut it at Ohio State. Now, that's more about Ohio State misjudging their quarterback than Joe Burrow.
Yeah.
But the point is still the same. Yeah, I think it's very close at the skill positions. I'll take Harris. The receivers are a toss-up. That's a tough one for me. I love Justin Jefferson.
You'd probably go 1A, 1B with Justin Jefferson and Devontae Smith. Or at least... Yeah. Maybe not. Devontae Smith did was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. I would go Smith 1, Jefferson 2, Jamar Chase 3, and Jalen Waddle 4. But it's absolutely comparable.
But there's a world in which you have Waddle all year, and then maybe we're thinking about Justin Jefferson as still the guy ahead of, right, we can play this what-if game all the time, and Devontae Smith probably doesn't win a Heisman if Jalen Waddle doesn't get hurt, and all of these other things, but the idea of Jalen Waddle probably being the best receiver on that football team, or at least the idea that coming into this season it wasn't a discussion who the best receiver on that team was, and it wasn't Devontae Smith, is absolutely ridiculous, and is an interesting what if to think about, because if they play 2 more games and they have Jalen Waddle, I'm not sure the numbers even give you a chance to really have the conversation. I think Alabama just might clearly be the better one, which is a crazy thing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that wouldn't be the case in a normal season in which they have to play their road games, with packed stadiums and these other things. So maybe it wouldn't be as big of a difference as I think maybe it could be. But there are very obvious ways for this Alabama offense to have looked even more terrifying all year, and we're still having this conversation.
And the tiebreaker for me, and then Chris, I want to hear your thoughts, is the offensive line.
Mm.
That's where I'll go with Alabama. I think it's very, very close in the skill positions, but that offensive line is so good it makes everybody's life easier. That's not that LSU's was bad by any means, but this Alabama one is just so dominant.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I would say, to answer your original question, I'll take this Alabama offense.
Yeah, I think I will too. I think it's a close call. I mean, I think, and part of it is I don't know if I'm using recency bias too much of just that's the team that's in my head right now, and that's the team that I don't see. I think I'm gonna go Alabama. I think I like the offensive line more. I think I like, I think the receiving core is comparable. I like, yeah, it's a tough call for me. I mean, I'm kind of struggling with it, but I think I think I'm going to go with the recency. I think I'm going to go with the Heisman winner. I think I'm going to go with the best receiver. I think it is clearly Devontae Smith, of the group. So I'll go with Alabama, Alabama's offense. One other thing I wanted to say with regard to their offense, and one thing that I think is worth noting, with relation to their offense, is just how much Nick Saban has been able to change with the game over the past several years. His teams from when he took over to the middle of the last decade, roughly, their approach was much different than what we saw in this Alabama team last night. It was a running attack that was trying to smother you. It was trying to suffocate you with their defense. And now the approach is that no matter what you can do, if you're Ohio State, if you're an opponent, their receivers are always going to be open. Like it's like there's not much you can do. Obviously, we talked about things you could do to make it a little bit less than what we saw last night. But Najee Harris is going to hurt you. Those receivers are going to be open one way or another. And yes, they could have done a better job on Devontae Smith. They could have made an adjustment sooner. But there's still going to be somebody open, and that still is not going to change the end outcome of that game. So I have appreciated what Nick Saban has done to adapt to the way the game is being played, that he is not, right, it's not just, we talk about this sustained success for him in that program, and it can be easy to kind of think that they've just done it the same way year after year if you're not paying attention. I mean, I know I'm not someone who's followed the game that closely, and so it can be easy for me to fall into that trap of thinking that they've kind of accomplished it the same way, that the system has been the same, and it really hasn't. Like it has morphed, it has changed with the college game, and so I think that deserves a lot of credit as well. To know, yeah.
Let's just put the perfect offense together. Yeah, Joe Burrow at quarterback. Our three wide receivers are Devontae Smith, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. We got Najee Harris in the backfield and the Alabama offensive line. There you go. Yep,
that's it. That's the offense.
It's a little ridiculous how not far away you are from that being reality, right? Like I'm not sure I could put a better like if I gave you the entire college football world, who would you put on that team ahead of the guys that of course there are, if we go historically, but my point being is that maybe all of the best skill position players of the last 2 years played for those two teams, which is
pretty close.
Which is not, which is putting too big of a blanket over everything, but it's definitely Joe Burrow. It's definitely Devontae Smith and Justin Jefferson. I mean, maybe you throw somebody else in there third, but I feel like those are definitely the two best wide receivers of the last 2 years. And then you say well, those two teams just won the national championship, so duh, they're going to have a bunch of really good players. But the point is that that's not always the case, and you could build. I mean, there's not anybody I'm longing for if that's what you give me.
And
just to put,
if you're looking,
go ahead.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good.
If you're looking at the receiver position to replace Justin Jefferson, you might be looking at Alabama last season. Right? They also lost the first round receivers.
Yep.
Who got drafted before Justin Jefferson. So yeah, it's ridiculous. I also found it interesting. These narratives about Alabama are fascinating to me. The point you just made, Chris, about the fact that like Nick Saban sort of in between these two sets of titles kind of had a revelation and said, I can't do it this way anymore. We've got to adapt and become more mobile, more flexible, harder to stop offensively, harder to scheme for. You just can't win with defense anymore. And all of a sudden, they've just created this juggernaut. And the other one is that, Alabama never loses. We talked about this is only a second undefeated team. And this idea that Alabama always blows people out in the national championship game. They beat Clemson 45-40 and Georgia 26-23 in overtime thanks to Devontae Smith as a freshman in their two other playoff championships. We have not, of course, these last couple games have been blowouts, but they have not been by Alabama these past couple of seasons. This is the first time they showed up in this game and blew somebody out of the water.
That's a good point. Yeah, that is a good point. One thing, you guys might have seen this stat. There's been a lot of stats, of course, about Nick Saban. One thing that I just saw this one and I had to write it down because it was just so telling. He has won a national championship now in seven of his last 16 seasons. The other 129 current head coaches have a combined 6.
Wow.
He has more championships in his last 16 seasons than all the other current coaches have combined right now.
Can you name where those 6? This is the stat I had too.
Boy,
Can you name where those 6 championships came from?
Okay, so we've got an LSU. Where
coach.
Like the coach?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Not the school. Okay. Ed Orgeron.
Yep.
Urban.
Not a current coach.
Oh, not a current coach. Okay, right. So the current
coaches.
Current head coach. So like Ryan Day being on the
does not count.
Does not count, right? Because he wasn't. No. Okay, all right. Oh man,
I missed one when I started thinking because I saw the stat and then I started figuring out who they were and I missed one. I had to go find the answer. I went, oh right. Some of them are obvious, some of them are trickier.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm blanking. Who do we have so far?
Ed Orgeron.
Orgeron.
He's got. So that's one of the 6.
Okay.
Jimbo Fisher.
Yep.
Okay.
Jimbo's got 1, so that's 2.
Okay. Is there a coach that has more than 1 currently? Okay. Oh, Dabo.
Yep.
Okay,
yeah.
So he's got 2.
So that's up to 4.
So that's 4.
Now you're getting to the more difficult ones.
We said, Urban Meyer doesn't count. No, that doesn't work.
If you're blanking, I'll give you a hint in a minute.
Okay. We're not talking tricky as in like he's at Florida Atlantic now or something. And
they both, neither of them are at the school they won it at, but they both coach Power 5 schools.
Okay.
Currently. Neither of them are in the same conference they won their national championship in either.
Oh boy, I don't know college football this well.
Yeah. Are these like big names? Like, are these names that we're gonna go? When you say them?
Yeah. You got to think of, these are not. You don't associate these coaches with the current landscape of college football in the sense that they're right up there battling with Dabo and Urban Meyer's Ohio State and Nick Saban's Alabama.
Okay.
they're sort of in the generation before that, if you will.
Okay.
Mm.
And they didn't. Did they all win them sometime in the last 16 years? Because that's not necessarily the question, right? They don't have to have necessarily
Right.
won them.
16, so that
They
was
don't have to
Is
have won them within
Stoops
that.
one?
not active.
Oh, he's not. You're right. Okay.
I don't. I believe they were in the last 16 years, if I have my years correct.
Is Mac Brown still coaching football? It's Mac Brown. Mac
North
Brown's one of them.
Carolina.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Oh.
Mac Brown at Texas,
Yeah,
right?
so it's that kind of thing where it's a big name, but you don't necessarily. And there's one more. This is the one that I forgot about too.
We have Jimbo Fisher. Did somebody guess that?
Yeah, Josh said Jimbo.
Josh had that. Okay, sorry. I was just
This man is not relevant in the college football landscape in any way, shape, or form right now, other than he's the coach of a Power Five school.
Les Miles.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well done.
okay. Now that.
Okay. Who's Les Miles' coach right now?
Kansas.
Oh, right. I'm not sure you can get more relevant in Power 5
That's
football right now than that's too funny.
I
Okay.
thought that was an interesting little factoid.
Wow, you
Yeah.
guys got the same factoid there.
You did the research, JD. You dove into it. I was just like, ooh, that's cool.
All right.
And the other one,
Sure.
this is also one of my all-time favorite stats that now Nick Saban has taken. It's still active, and there was a stretch for a very long time where every single 4-year player that Tom Izzo coached made a Final Four, and eventually it got snapped. But I think there's only one recruiting class, if I am correct. Maybe it's two now if you count last season, but that I think it's just one recruiting class he's had that didn't make a Final Four. Every 4-year, if you stay with Nick Saban 4 years, you've got a national championship. That part's pretty ridiculous too.
That is pretty
His whole
ridiculous.
tenure, yeah. Just show up. If you're here in this program and you stay all 4 years, you're going to get a title.
Wow, that's crazy. All
Those
right.
are the factoids I've got.
I like the factoids. I think I'm out of
Good
things.
stuff.
To put a bow on the college football season, who's number one in the country going into next season? Because it's probably not Clemson. I mean, you're losing Mac Jones and all of the, right? You're losing Mac Jones and
The
Devontae
offense.
Smith. You're losing the offense, right?
Yeah.
You're losing Justin Fields if you're at Ohio State. You're
I
losing
think
Trevor
they're
Lawrence
losing
if you're
a
at
big
Clemson. What about Georgia?
That's the team people are really looking at.
Because Georgia had they found a quarterback. It took JT Daniels years to find a place where they actually liked him, and he finally found one. So that might be the best team, at least on paper, in the SEC next year. Of course, Alabama will be good, but you lose that offense, and it's not like. And who's next in line for that job? Who else was getting snaps this year for Alabama? It was Bryce Young.
Yeah, you got to think
Yeah.
that's Bryce Young's team next year.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Bryce Young, I'm pretty sure, was a 5-star, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So it's not exactly like you're being left with somebody without any talent, but you are losing a lot of. It's not just the quarterback position. You're losing a ton of really, really. I mean, have you seen the list of the awards this year for college football? I mean, like 80% of it is Alabama players.
Yep.
And 75% of that is starting, is starters on the offensive side of the football, and most of those guys are gone. So apart from that, I'm not. Maybe Oklahoma, Spencer Rattler
Yeah,
comes
that's what I
back.
was going to say.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
That might be the most exciting team in college football next year, if not the best. So you would think that those two teams are somewhere in the top 5, if not
They
the
could
top
very
3.
well- They could very well be 1 and 2.
They might.
Because that's the interesting part of this is if you're. I guess I'll answer the question from my perspective this way. If I need to take a team and pick and say you play everybody that's this without practice in the season to develop, you just play these teams against each other. I'm taking Georgia and Oklahoma as my top 2 teams in the country, which to me means they should be preseason 1 and 2.
Sure.
But that's a completely different story than what Alabama or Ohio State or Clemson looks like at the end of the season.
Sure.
Just ask Spencer Rattler how much a difference a season makes.
Yeah.
Right.
He's an exponentially better quarterback than he was day one because he hadn't played college football before. It's not criticism. It's just it takes time to get all of this going, and when you have to replace so much. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm picking Georgia to win the national championship.
Sure.
I would be surprised if that happens. Mm-hmm. But in terms of, like you said, Josh, on paper and who is going to look the best and be ready to go from day one, those are the two teams that stand out to me. But we do this every year where we talk about all the guys that everybody loses, and then it's still Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State. And usually Oklahoma is the fourth team.
Right.
That's what the odds are right now. I'm looking at an article. It's literally Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and then Georgia. So that's the first early odds. So
sounds about right.
Yep.
It'll just be. I mean, there's just so much. There's so much that all of those teams have to replace. I mean, right at Clemson, you're replacing Amari Rodgers and Travis Etienne and Trevor Lawrence, among other things. On the defensive side of the football as well. And we saw this year that when Clemson's not full strength on the defensive side of the football, they aren't exactly that great of a defensive team, which is true for most teams. But the point being is that it's not like all of their second strings are also all American defensive type players. But yeah, you're right. It's certainly an overthinking of things. But if you're looking at what teams have, I feel like Georgia and Oklahoma are the two teams that what they're going to put on the football field more than anybody else, at least at this moment.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Oklahoma in particular. If things come back, I just really like I can really sort of explain their 2020 season so easily with their early struggles and then what they've done since then. I'm really excited about what this team could be moving forward in particular. Maybe we have a really much more competitive college football. So yeah, I don't know. I don't even want to say it because I feel like I'm jinxing it because I shouldn't even say it. I take it back. I don't want to jinx it, but it feels like the potential is there for that. I'll just say that. But it's one of those things where until we start to see it on the field and see who emerges and see about the development, it's just so hard to assess.
Because, again, I don't think anybody was looking at this Alabama team and saying they were 28 points better than everybody else in the country at the beginning of this season. But then you were replacing the guy who was supposed to be the elite quarterback in Nick Saban's system and the one guy that took him over the edge. And then Mac Jones came out and had a better season than Tua ever did.
Yeah.
And nobody was really looking at Mac Jones. It was just kind of, he's one of those guys that they throw in there and his numbers look good because he's playing with the best guys in the country. And of course, they were expected to be really good. Nobody's surprised they won the national championship. But I certainly didn't look at them on paper and say that's going to be a dominant national champion, one of the best teams of all time. It's so hard to predict because it's easy to fall in that trap of look what they're losing. But then we end up in the same spot because the guy behind them is a 5-star too.
Yeah. Except for at Ohio State. Jack Miller III was second on the depth chart, and he didn't take a snap all year at Ohio State. Now, I know when you only play 7 games, you're trying to get as many reps in for all your guys as possible. And so I get, but, the other quarterback on Ohio State's roster right now is the guy who was the 9th quarterback in Arizona alone. Not the 9th quarterback in the country, 334th nationally, the 13th style pro quarterback, the 13th pro style quarterback. So it's not like of course, this guy's ridiculous. 6'4", 210. I mean, he's winning state championships and going to Elite 11 camps. So, of course, he's a good quarterback, but it's not a Justin Fields level recruit. And he also didn't take a single snap this year, at least according to College Football Reference. It was just Justin Fields. So that's, when talking about Ohio State, if there's always the chance that somebody transfers to Ohio State or something else, but at this very moment, and I actually don't know if they have another quarterback coming in.
I was gonna say, don't worry, they got the 5-star coming in. His name is Cal McCord.
Okay, well then Kyle McCord is probably gonna make it happen for him. But
But again, you're starting a true freshman.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is Kyle McCord is not Trevor Lawrence.
Right.
It's a fair question, but I was gonna make that joke. Don't worry, the 5 stars there.
Oh, thank goodness. I was really, really, really worried about him. Kyle McCord, there you go. But 25th nationally, third style pro quarterback, not the best quarterback in Pennsylvania according to. So it's not like, right? It was Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, and in that recruiting class in particular, and that was it, right? So.
Yeah.
Also, Alabama has 3 of the top 8 players in the class of 2021 joining their team.
Sure, yeah.
We'll learn about them in 2 years.
6'6", 305, 6'6", 283. 2 offensive linemen, offensive tackles in the top 5 going to Alabama. Then you got a defensive end going to Alabama. They're going to be all right. Anything else, guys?
No, I don't think so.
I'm glad that we finished the season.
Yeah.
And now, hopefully, the world is a much different place by the time we kick off the 2021 campaign.
Please, for crying out loud. Thank you so much for being a part of our Tuesday morning here. 110 Daily will be getting a brand change, first of all, since it's not completely daily any longer, but we'll announce that when it comes. But we'll be back on Friday to preview what's happening over the weekend. Now college basketball can take center stage on the collegiate side of things. Of course, we've got NFL playoffs to talk about, 4 games this weekend. So another packed NFL playoffs weekend, and we'll be back to talk about all of it. Thank you so much for making us part of your day. We'll be back on Friday. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we will see you then.